Good.
Hi, everybody. This is Jessie Carpenter, the city clerk. I'm going to give, let's wait about 3 minutes before we start to give other people a chance to join. And then I'm going to invite people into the webinar. So you don't have to come in, but I'm going to give everybody the opportunity to be in the webinar. So it's more like a meeting and less like us talking to you. We'll give it just another minute or so. Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Jessie Carpenter, the city clerk, and tonight we have several members of the Board of Elections and several members of the Ethics Commission here to share information about the election and some things that candidates need to keep in mind. Matt, do you want to, next slide, please? So, and also Irma, the Navarte, the assistant city clerk, is on the call. So tonight we want to provide information to candidates and the public about the election process, explain requirements, and help candidates know what to expect from now through the end of the election. We'll pause at the end of each section so that you can ask questions, raise your hand. Please keep your microphone muted if you are not speaking, but we will call on you. We'll also keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A in case you don't want to speak, but would rather pose your question there. We're making a recording of this, and we'll have the PowerPoint and the recording will be available on the website. So I'm just going to turn this over to Tim Anderegg, who is, Tim, are you the chair or vice chair of the Board of Elections?
Co-chair, I guess, technically. So
okay. All right. So I'm turning it over to you.
Great. So we're starting off with just where to find information about the election. And just to clarify, we're recording this presentation and also we'll be sharing the slides with everyone. But you can also view the information on the city website with a link here to the main election information page, a link to the municipal code and the charter, and contact information for the city clerk, Jessie, and the Board of Elections as well. And just to reiterate, it is the candidate's responsibility to understand and follow all the requirements and obligations when running for elected office in Takoma Park. So we're happy to help you. Please reach out to us if you have any questions.
Hi, this is Matt. I just wanted to jump in really quick on this. The board isn't just here to count ballots and ensure the transparency of the election. It's also here to help candidates. We want people to run. We want this to be an easy process, even though it seems like it isn't. So please if there's anything going on, you have questions, you really just should reach out to us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. And I'll add that Matt is watching the chat throughout this webinar, and we'll be speaking later. But if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to raise your hand or put the question in the chat. I see a question from Ambrose, not being able to hear Jesse. Can you hear me, Ambrose?
You might want to keep talking, so.
Keep going for now. Oh, no, he cannot hear me either. Can anyone else who's an attendee confirm that you can hear us? Okay. All right. So Ambrose, you might need to check your audio settings on your side, but for now we're going to proceed. And please, if you have questions, just put them in the chat. All right. So first, doing an overview of the municipal elections in Takoma Park. So the municipal elections are run by the city clerk's office and the Takoma Park Board of Elections. Members of the Board of Elections, like myself and Matt, are resident volunteers appointed by the City Council. And just to be very clear, the Takoma Park Board of Elections and the city clerk only run the municipal elections. We have no part in the administration of the county, state, and federal elections, which are run by the Montgomery County Board of Elections and the Maryland State Board of Elections, respectively. Also, the Montgomery County and the state, Maryland State Board, are not involved with administration of our own elections in Takoma Park. So just if you have questions, just verify which election we're talking about and reach out to the responsible party. We're here responsible for Takoma Park specifically and only. Board members and designated city staff serve as election judges as well. And to clarify, under the municipal code, board members shall not hold or be a candidate for any elective office in government during their term on the board. And members of the board election shall not serve as the treasurer or campaign manager for any candidate for city elective office or be an advocate for or against any campaign. So we are really neutral parties. We're here to help all the candidates navigate the code and the charter and the process for running for election and helping all voters vote in an equitable way. Just want to mention there's also one vacancy on the board at the moment. So if you have anyone that you're aware of that's interested in joining the board, please let us know. All right, so important dates. The next important date coming up is Tuesday, September 10th, which is the nominating caucus for the city election. We'll be talking more about that later, about what the nominating caucus is and what the requirements are. After that, on Friday, September 13th, all nominated candidates must file campaign finance registration if you have not already filed. So you can go ahead and register to run before the nominating caucus, but you must register after it by September 13th or decline your nomination at that point. Matt will later be talking a lot more about campaign finance, but just to be aware that in terms of upcoming deadlines, September 13th is that deadline to register if you plan to run. On Monday, September 16th is when we expect the first financial disclosure statement, which is an ethics requirement. And again, we have members from the Ethics Commission here to talk a bit more about that going further down the presentation. And also submission of the candidate's 150-word statement and photo for the city newsletter. So we want a nice high-resolution head and shoulders photo to show up properly in the newsletter, and your 150-word statement to describe why you're running. Both of those, along with the disclosure statement, are due Monday, September 16th. So that time period between September 10th and 16th, there's a lot going on there. The very first finance campaign report is September 23rd. So after registered, you want to make your initial finance report of any contributions you've received, any expenditures you've made so far in the early phase of the campaign at that point. And October 14th will be the second campaign finance report, which is the last one before the election, which is on November 5th. So I just, can we go back real quick to see if there's any questions about any of those dates, or we'll be going over some more details later on each of these. All right, let's go on. All right, so after the election, on Tuesday, November 12th, any anonymous campaign contributions should be contributed to the City of Takoma Park General Fund. And again, we'll be talking a bit more about contributions later. On Wednesday, November 13th, the certified results reported to the City Council. November 15th is the deadline for filing city election challenger appeals. So that's the certified results on the 13th, and then you have to the 15th for anyone in the city to file an election challenge or appeal. Following that, we move very quickly here. On November 18th, the swearing in of the new city council occurs. And on November 25th, following that swearing in, is the third campaign finance report. So that one's intended to review for everyone to report on their final expenditures and contributions after the election is over. Followed by Friday, January 31st, this is 2025 at this point, is the annual report on retention or disposition of surplus campaign funds. So think of the third campaign finance report as the last one, detailing what happened during the election. By January 31st, you need to report on what funds are left within your campaign. All right. Now, going back a bit to the election itself, there's a few important dates related to ballot mailing and receipt. So on Sunday, October 6th, the first day that mail-in voting ballots may be sent out to voters by Takoma Park. So that's the earliest, essentially, that the mail-in voting ballots may be sent. And Monday, October 21st, is the last day that mail-in voting ballots may be sent out to voters by Takoma Park. So it's essentially a window between October 6th and 21st when those ballots will be sent out to voters. That's a good time, to remind folks that those ballots are coming. On Tuesday, November 5th, all ballot drop boxes are closed and sealed at 8 p.m. That's on election day. All ballot drop boxes are closed and sealed. Yes. And then November 12th is the deadline for receipt of ballots arriving by U.S. mail. Ballots must be postmarked on or before election day.
I just wanted to jump in really quickly. We just don't know the exact days when the ballots will be sent out. It's just logistics with United States Postal Service.
Yeah.
When they actually are, I think Jesse will be able to let candidates know. They sometimes go out in batches, but when it does happen, I think we'll be able to let everyone know. But we just don't know in advance.
Yeah, that's why there's a fairly large window for when we hope for it to occur. It depends on a number of different factors. All right. Okay. So what do you need to do, or who do you need to be in order to qualify for candidacy? So you need to be a registered Maryland voter. And Takoma Park has its own voter registration process, as does the state of Maryland separately. So you need to be a registered Maryland voter. You need to be 18 years old by the date of the election day. For city council, you must reside in the ward for at least 6 months prior to the election, and you must remain a resident of that ward during the term. For mayor, you must reside in the city for 6 months prior to the election and remain a resident during the term. To have your name on the ballot, you must receive a nomination and a second on the nominating caucus on September 10th. We'll have further information about that later in the presentation, but just to clarify, if you want your name on the ballot, you must receive a nomination and a second at the nominating caucus. And that being said, voters can write in their vote as well. So you can register as a write-in, which will have your name listed on the website as a write-in candidate, or you cannot be registered as a write-in, and voters can still write in your name on their ballot if they wish.
Hey, Tim, this is
Yep.
Jesse. I'd like to hop in for just a minute.
Sure.
The qualifications for candidacy, you do not need to be a registered Maryland voter. You can be a registered voter in the city of Takoma Park as well. So Maryland voter registration is not a requirement for candidacy.
Thanks for that clarification. Yeah, I wasn't sure as I was reading it if that was correct. But yeah, so we do have a separate voter registration requirements for Takoma Park. So if you're registered in the city or the state, you can be a candidate. So let's clarify that. You can be registered in the city or the state. Okay. Oh, and I see Ambrose has a question about the age. Just to clarify, Jesse, since you can register as a 16-year-old in the city, that you have to be 18 to be a candidate still. Is that right?
That's right. Our city charter says 18 years is the minimum age to be to be a candidate.
Yeah.
18 years old by the date of the election.
Yeah. So those are two separate requirements. You have to be registered and you have to be 18. All right. All right. So details on the nominating caucus. As I mentioned, this takes place at 7:30 p.m. on Tuesday, September 10th in the Community Center Auditorium. You can participate via Zoom for those who are nominating and those who are seconding a nomination. In this case, you must register for the Zoom call by 5 p.m. You must have at least 2 eligible voters. So 1 person to nominate you and 1 to second the nomination. You can have more than 1 person speak to second your nomination. So you need only 1 to nominate you, but more than 1 can second your nomination if you'd like to have multiple people speak at the nominating caucus.
Hey, Tim, quick
question. Go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, maybe Jesse knows, do the 2 people who nominate you, do they have to be from that candidate's ward?
Yes.
Yep. Good question. So yeah,
Yes. If they're running for city council as to represent a ward, yes.
Absolutely. And you can also nominate or second yourself potentially. But at least 1 person needs to be the nominator and a separate person needs to be the second the nomination. So they cannot be the same person. Running for city council, both people must be in the same ward that you're running for. For mayor, they can be from anyone in the city, but they must be eligible voters regardless. And speakers are limited to 3 minutes each. Any questions about the nominating caucus? All right. I'm going to hand it over to the Ethics Commission to talk a bit about conflict of interest and role of the Ethics Commission.
Good evening. Thanks everyone for joining. I'm Michael Ajaya, the Secretary of the Ethics Commission. With me, I have Mike Miller, our chair, and Patricia, who's been on the commission for many years. So I just wanted to go over a couple things real quick. First, just talk about what the Ethics Commission is. Like the Board of Elections, we're a group of citizens in the town who volunteer to participate in the commission. We essentially administer the Takoma Park Ethics Ordinance. There's a link to it in the slides. We also, under the ordinance, the Ethics Commission can receive complaints for allegations of violations of the ordinance. So we receive complaints and can investigate those. We also can render advisory opinions. So if a member of the city or a candidate or a elected official has a question about whether their course of conduct complies with the ordinance, we could render an advisory opinion. So that's our role. Our other major role, which I'll talk about, is is to review financial disclosure forms that candidates for office and elected officials are required to submit. So couple things. So I just wanted to highlight there's many provisions in the ordinance. I suggest that you all read through those, the ethics provisions, in particular 3.04070, which enumerates several types of prohibited conduct. A lot of the provisions in there relate to conflicts of interest. So suggest that you read those provisions and understand them. Just as a general matter, the ordinance prohibits participating in a matter if you or your qualified relative has an interest in that matter. These could be legal interests, financial interests. Qualified relatives are defined as spouse, domestic partner, parent, child, or dependent, or sibling. And yes, there are some questions in the chat. I think we'll to the extent those relate to the Board of Elections, we'll circle back to that after my presentation. So it's important to understand the conflicts rules and when they apply, to be aware if you're participating in a matter as a city official, whether you or your relatives have any interest in that matter, and to be aware of it. It also apply to things like if you're negotiating for employment with a company and that company is business with the city, things of that nature. So, and also as a general manager, it's a general matter to try to avoid, an appearance of impropriety. So one way we sort of administer the ordinance is the financial disclosure forms. So every member of the city council is required to submit a financial disclosure form, and all candidates also have to submit a financial disclosure form. And these forms are made public, and essentially you need to publicly report your interests, property interests, interests in corporations, There's various different requirements, interests in businesses that might be doing business with the city, sources of income, certain types of loans. And so we have a form that we've developed. We've recently amended the form to try to make it user friendly. So hopefully you all find it usable and clear. And the form essentially tracks the requirements under the ordinance about what you're required to submit in the form. And I understand that we've recently created an electronic version. One of our members created that. So hopefully folks, instead of printing it out, if they want to just do it electronically, they can easily input the information electronically. And the forms need to be submitted to the town clerk, to Jesse. And then what happens is then we, as the commission, we meet and we review them, and we have an obligation to make sure that the forms are complete. And if they're not complete, we go to the person that submitted them and point out the parts that are not complete, and we ask them to complete the forms correctly and to include all the relevant information. So what we ask of you is to review the forms and get started on them early, not to wait until the last minute, because depending on your situation, you might have some things to report. So and also we ask that if you submit a form and we determine that it's not complete, that you very expeditiously edit, include the corrections or whatever items that we're requesting, so that we can sort of make that determination that you've completed the form. So I think the form is due on the 16th of September. Jesse can correct me if that's incorrect.
It is due the Monday after the nominating caucus, no later than the Monday after the nominating caucus.
Okay, so that's a pretty quick turnaround. So that's why we ask that, you start thinking about, now, what you might need to report, just so that you don't feel time constricted. And then we might have a quick turnaround after that if there's gaps in what you report, to make sure that you include all the information. So that's all I had to share. There's more to say about ethics and the requirements. Definitely urge you to read the ordinance, familiarize yourself with it. It is in compliance with Maryland also has an ethics law that our ordinance mirrors and is in compliance with. So I don't know if other members of the commission who are here want to add anything to anything I said. Michael, Patricia.
I would simply say budget at least a half hour to go through that form, maybe a full hour, because when reviewing these forms, we've noticed, they're a good, I think it's 16 pages total. Now, obviously, it's not single spaced and you have blanks after, there's only a handful of questions on each page, but you have to really carefully read those questions, because people who have previously filled out these forms still apparently make mistakes on them. They can be, you really got to carefully read what the question's asking for. Sometimes it's asking for specifics rather than general information. So yeah, give yourself time to go through it carefully. Make sure you can accurately complete it. And there's a chance that we'll go through it and notice something that needs a little clarification or some additional information. So get it in as early as possible. That way we can get back to you and we don't have any kind of issues running up against the deadline. That's my only suggestion. Thanks.
Great suggestion. Thanks, Mike. Okay, unless anyone has questions about ethics, I don't see any in the chat. I will turn it back over to the Board of Elections folks.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks to the Ethics Commission. I think we did have one question around the nominating caucus and what happens if someone is nominated, but may want to accept or reject their nomination.
Tim, let me ask the question so it's part of the recording.
Sure.
The question is, can you nominate someone and second them without their knowledge? How do they accept or reject the nomination?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that can happen. And the deadline to accept or reject the nomination is the same as the deadline to register as a candidate after the nominating caucus. So the nominating caucus happens on September 10th, Tuesday. You need to register by that September 13th, the Friday, the September 13th of that week. and you can either accept or reject the nomination at that time.
Right. So rest assured, we will not place your name on the ballot without your knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah, if you are nominated, the city clerk will reach out to you and we'll follow up in terms of that registration by the 13th. And then, as the Ethics Commission just said, the financial disclosure form is then due on the following Monday, the 16th. So those are happening for the back-to-back. Yep.
I did have one additional question for ethics. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
The question is just who makes up the Ethics Commission, and are they Takoma Park residents?
Yes,
Yes, we are.
it is Takoma Park residents, and I guess we probably should have mentioned it before, but we do we still have 2 vacancies, Jesse? I think there's still 2. We just
Correct.
filled one.
There are 2 vacancies on the Ethics Commission.
Yes,
And-
and so if anybody's interested, they should definitely contact Jesse and let her know.
And how are they selected for those positions?
There's an application process, and then the city council reviews the applications and makes a determination.
And for whatever it's worth, that's how selection works for the Board of Elections as well.
Yep.
And I think pretty much all the commissions in the city.
Certainly
right?
all committees and commissions
Committees,
at the city. Yep. All right, so we have 2 openings on the Ethics Commission and 1 on the Board of Elections. So spread the word.
I have a question here about the financial disclosure form. The question is that it has not been posted. Is that correct? And any sense of when it will be?
Yes, I will have it posted tomorrow, although it may be, yes, I will have it posted tomorrow. I'm sorry, we're doing this session earlier than we usually do, and I'm just not caught up yet. But we'll have it up tomorrow, and you can find it on the candidate information page.
And that's true for a lot of other forms for elections as well that we'll get to later.
Correct.
Yeah, and again, at the beginning of this presentation, I think it's like the 3rd slide, we have links to the candidate information page, which will have all this information on it.
It looks like we have someone raising their hand, Jesse.
Is that right? It looks like a panelist.
Yeah, Elizabeth,
Yep.
this is Elizabeth Wallace. Thank you. If some organizations do not allow their staff members nor their volunteers or sometimes other people associated with them to be involved in things like a nominating committee. And so do you ever, when someone presents themselves at a nominating a forum and endorses a candidate, do you ever check the organization that they mention they are from to see if they're violating that organization's ethics in doing so?
Yes, I think from our perspective, the only requirement is that you're a registered voter that lives in the ward of that council person, that candidate's position that they're going for. So yeah, we don't check anything beyond the fact that they are a registered Takoma Park voter.
Thank you.
Quick question, just Catherine asked in the chat, are the financial disclosures made public? And I believe, Michael, you said yes before?
So I know that they're available for inspection and copying. I'm not sure if they're proactively posted. I will defer to Jesse on that. There are certain, is that right?
That is exactly correct. We don't post them on the website as of now, but they are available for review upon request and for review and copying.
And there are certain items that I think can be redacted if the person who submits the form requests that, like I think a address or maybe some other types of information. It's listed in the ordinance.
It looks like we have 2 other raised hands. Do we want to take those questions? I have another question in chat as well.
I think Patricia or yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to mention regarding the financial forms. At the very top of the form, one is given the option to be informed if anyone does seek their form out. Okay, I think that's important. And the other thing was to say about the commercial for persons on the Ethics Commission. We are especially in need of representation from 2 wards in Takoma Park that are not currently represented. So I'll just put it that way. Thank you.
I have a question in the chat. It's, do you check police reports for candidates? I can just speak for the elections side of things. I don't think we do, right, Jesse?
No, there is no requirement
And so
to do that.
The ethics, their side of it.
Not aware of that, no.
No.
All right. Any more questions about the nominating caucus? Oh,
Elizabeth, do you have another question? Or is your hand just still up?
No, yes, thank you. That was a good question about whether or not a background check is done, because, for example, when you go on a ride-along with the police in Takoma Park, you have to go through a background check, and that's quite a bit less than serving on city council. Have you considered, or what would you support, and maybe you don't want to deal with this at this meeting, requiring that in the future?
We have a lot to cover. I think this is something that might be better brought up at a Board of Elections meeting, or maybe an ethics meeting, or also before the city council.
Well, quickly, I could say one thing, and that is that if a candidate goes on a ride along, they will need that background check. So just FYI. So, but yeah, definitely, if you're interested in pursuing that, you're welcome to do so.
Yeah, we're eager to hear feedback. So please
Yeah.
email us your concerns. We can talk about them, but we do have a lot of material to present here. So.
And the city clerk and board elections contact info are on the first couple slides. So please send us any feedback you have. I think Catherine had a question about what wards need representation for the Ethics Commission. You want to touch on that real quick? Or
I think it's 3, 4, and 6, but I could be mistaken.
Yeah, I just posted into the chat there about that. It's where there are 3 of us from Ward 1. So I think the general answer is any ward other than Ward 1 is definitely in need. But we do have 1 member each from Ward 2 and Ward 5, and that's not to say that if you're in Ward 1 you shouldn't apply. But as far as needs, we could definitely use people from the wards other than 1 and possibly 2 and 5.
right. Shall we move on to the next slide?
Yeah, do we have any other questions for the Ethics Commission's folks? Some might drop off, or maybe they'll stay, but now's the time to ask if anyone has any other questions.
Yeah.
Looks like we aren't getting any, so we will continue.
All right. Oh, I see a hand up actually, Jessica Lyman.
Just one last question, whether the ethics form includes financial disclosure forms about income, or whether it's only about financial interests that pose potential conflicts of interest.
Jessica, it doesn't ask about income, and I apologize for not having the form posted. I will before this meeting is over, but no, it doesn't ask. It asks about employment, but not about income.
That's right. And I think I may have misspoken earlier. I think I may have said that. So stand corrected.
Give it 1 more minute for any questions. Or a moment, minute. All right. Let's move on to election transparency. Again, if you have any questions about any of this, please raise your hand or comment in the chat. So poll watchers, all intake and processing, counting, and tabulation of ballots will happen in a publicly accessible place, likely at the main auditorium in City Hall during regular business hours. The city clerk will announce in advance the time and place of those work sessions. So we will make sure that all that is transparent about when it is occurring and where it is occurring. The public can watch most election activity, and candidates specifically may designate poll watchers to view in their place, particularly in the polling place on election day.
To add some clarity here, candidates are more than welcome. We invite them to come when we're tabulating, counting, processing the ballots. The poll watchers, they just need poll watchers if they want poll watchers at the voting center on election day, because otherwise they need to follow the electioneering rules, which we will get to. But we really encourage anyone to come by, talk with us, to like really learn about the process. We really make a lot of efforts to do this during regular business hours in a publicly accessible place for the purpose of people coming by. We've had candidates come by and talk with us. I think also it will be televised and streamed as well. So.
Yep. Let's move on for now. Issues during the election cycle. Many issues may arise as the board begins to receive and process ballots. One common issue we run into all the time is that the voters may fail to sign the oath on the envelope. So there's the envelope itself and the ballot that is inside of it, and voters must sign the oath envelope within which the ballot is. If you are hearing from a voter that they're having an issue with their ballot, please have them contact the board and the city clerk, preferably by email. That's simply because the board is generally remote, where we have a shared inbox. We're checking on emails when we can. It may take 24 to 48 hours to respond, but email is the best way to reach the city clerk and the board, because we'll be able to get to that message within that time frame. And please report any concerns of potential election code violations by emailing the board and the city clerk. And in general, all questions around the election, you're welcome to email the board and the city clerk for those questions. All right, moving on.
Just want to jump in real quick again on this one. A lot of times people really start to panic when they think there's an issue with their ballot. It just hasn't come yet. Did it get there? It's not showing up. We really do our best to try to respond to folks quickly. I know Jesse's on the phone with people. We really make tons of efforts to try to correct where there are issues. So if there's a failure to sign the oath envelope, we do our best to contact the voter so they can come in and sign. So my advice is often just to tell folks that stay calm and just get in touch with us, and we will sort out whatever issues that they're having.
Absolutely. And as you talk to voters, encouraging them to look at their ballot as soon as they receive it and to understand it as well as they can, as early as they can, so that if they have any questions, they can reach out to us well in advance of election day as much as possible. But we'll try to handle every question that comes in as quickly as we can. All right. So on election day, there's electioneering rules in the code. So in general, except as specified here in section B below, an individual, including any candidate, watcher, or challenger, may not enter the no electioneering zone outside of a polling place while visibly wearing or carrying any clothing, button, sticker, sign, or other paraphernalia that indicates support or opposition to a candidate, question, or contest. So there will be a clear definition of what that no electioneering zone is, and no one is allowed to enter that zone while advocating for a particular candidate. The exception is that this regulation does not apply to clothing, buttons, or stickers worn by a voter who, without lingering, enters the polling place, votes, and then leaves. So certainly wear whatever you want when you come to vote, but if you're going to remain in that area, you should not be advocating visually for any particular support or opposition to a candidate. All right. After election day, reporting the results, which is very important. All election results that are released prior to the board's certification on November 13th are tentative and incomplete. So we will try to release a tentative tabulation of results as soon as possible, but the final certified results will be available on November 13th. The official result is only that which is certified by the board and presented to the city council on that date. On the evening of election day, we expect to be able to report results for most ballots received by mail or drop box prior to election day. So essentially, we'll try to tabulate everything that was submitted before election day, but we're unlikely to get through all the votes cast on election day that night. So we will have a tentative initial summary of votes cast before election day that night around, hopefully no later than 10 or 11. They will not receive, most likely they will not include the ballots received by mail or drop box on the Monday before election day. These results will not include the ballots cast on election day. And of course, these results will not include the ballots that were mailed before or on election day, but not yet received by the board. So as I mentioned earlier, votes cast and postmarked up to election day will be counted. We will not obviously receive those until after election day, which is why there's a delay up to November 13th of releasing the final certified results. These results will also not include the full ranked choice results, which we'll talk about in a little bit in terms of what ranked choice voting means, but will reflect only the first choices marked on the ballots. All right. I will say there's a comment by Cindy in the chat. So one thing that also needs to occur when folks are supporting a campaign, you might, if you are a political organization that are making expenditures in this election, you do need to register, as some candidates may want to seek endorsements from local groups, which is a very good point. Matt, if you want to, we will talk more about that later, but if you want to comment on that now.
You know, we'll get to that when talking about campaign finance in a little bit.
There's another question. What is the distance from the entry doors where literature can be distributed?
I think it's something like 100 feet, but it'll be very obvious if you're talking about electioneering on election day. Yeah.
And certainly distributing literature includes as electioneering, and that has to happen outside the no electioneering zone. That will be marked. And again, it is in the code and will be.
It'll be very obvious on election day because there will be a line of people at that line electioneering.
Yep. All right. So moving on to ranked choice voting. So Takoma Park elections use ranked choice voting. You can rank candidates in order of preference, your first, second, etc. choice. Ranking additional candidates will not affect your first choice. This is a crucial part of ranked choice voting. So you can choose who your first choice candidate is, and even if that person does not get enough votes to move on, your second choice will count just as well. So your other choices are only considered if your first choice is eliminated. How votes are counted in ranked choice voting? All first choice votes are counted. If a candidate gets more than 50% of the votes, they win. So after the first round, if any one candidate has the majority of the first choice votes, then they win and the count is over. If no candidate gets past that 50% mark, then the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated. Ballots for that candidate are counted for their second choice, right? So if someone's first choice candidate is eliminated because they received the fewest votes after the first round, then their second choice gets added in. Then we go back and review, is there a majority? If there's still no candidate with a majority, we repeat the process until a candidate has more than 50% of the remaining votes and is declared the winner. There is more information on the website about this. I'm not going to read all this right now. The code specifies the details of the ranked choice voting process. It is as I just described, but you are encouraged definitely to read through the charter to understand it more fully. And there's additional information that's on the candidate information webpage on the website.
It looks like we have a raised hand.
Yep, who's Elizabeth Wallace, I think, raised hand.
This is regarding ranked choice voting. I just wanted to say to anybody who's a candidate on this call tonight is that I did run in the past, and in the past, it's very intimidating to go to a yard and see a sign for a competitor. But with ranked choice voting, instead of feeling like a trespasser, if you go up to the door, you feel like you can go to the door and say, hey, I see you've made a choice, but would you consider me for second, for your second choice? So it makes it much more possible to feel comfortable about talking to anybody in the park about your candidacy.
Yep, that is a very good point. Part of the advantage of ranked choice voting is that it's valuable to talk to every voter, no matter what, and to make your pitch for why they should choose you, maybe as second or third, if not first. Randall?
Yes, as one of the candidates, or as a council member in Ward 3, I confirm what Elizabeth had to say, that it does make sense to go to all, for candidates to go to all residences and reach out and say, if I'm not your first choice, make me my second. So just to confirm what Elizabeth had to say, it does make a difference. And it also is helpful to talk with your fellow candidates, you know, to kind of see where you're at, where you might have commonalities.
Absolutely. Thanks, Randall. Any other? So here's an example, a sample ranked choice voting result. Oh, Cindy, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Well, I just saw the slide. So maybe I'll hold my comments till you're done introducing this.
Sure. So this sample ballot here is actually for City Council Ward 2 from 2017. As you can see, it doesn't show every step of the process necessarily in this result. It shows the first round votes and what's called the instant runoff. So the instant runoff, we don't actually manually go through every round of voting. There's software that tabulates the votes and does the process of saying, has anyone exceeded that 50%? If not, remove the lowest rate, the lowest vote count and move on to the next round. That happens repeatedly until at least one candidate gets over 50%. In this case, the first round, candidate Dabala had 46.8%, so that wasn't enough to certify the result. The instant runoff process ran. You can see that the votes for candidate Edgell ended up being removed, and the second choice votes for that candidate were distributed as the voter intended between the remaining candidates. That's also true with a write-in. So most likely the write-in was removed first and then Edgell during the instant runoff. And as a result, the final results ended up with a 54.5% vote count for candidate Dabala, which resulted in her election.
Who I think is here and has a question or a statement.
May I comment?
Sure.
Of course.
Thank you. So a couple of things. First, I can't find my picture button, so you'll just have to go with this. I agree with Elizabeth and Randy that I felt very welcome.
Was that the comment? I think you went on mute.
No, I think Cindy is. She's just.
Yeah, we got it now. Okay.
There we go.
Yep,
Yes.
yep, go ahead.
Video and audio.
Yeah, the visual is just so great. Okay, so what I was starting to say was I also felt that it was a positive to be able to go to people's houses who had a sign for somebody else, and that I felt welcome in almost every case. So that I agree with that. I wanted to also note that out of 123 people who voted for Mr. Edgell, 92 of them put in a second choice, and that's pretty good. It's not like just a couple of people do it, and this was early on. This was pretty much the first time this had been tried. So I think now more people are familiar with it, and more people will choose to do a second choice. So if you are a candidate, don't ignore this. It's really worth pursuing. That's what I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, we get questions around this all the time, but certainly one of the main ones is it never hurts the candidate who's your first choice if you vote for second, third, fourth choice down the road. So there's no harm in expressing your full opinion through all the rounds of voting.
Similarly, there's no reason to have the same person as your first, second, third, fourth, fifth. That does not.
Yeah, it does not have any effect.
Any other questions on ranked choice before we move on to authority lines and campaign finance?
All right. With that, I'm going to hand it over. Oh, I guess we have voter lists and then
Jesse might want to take this slide.
Sure.
Since she's the one who you'll be speaking with if you want a voter list.
Hi there. Yeah, I will take this slide because I know that there are people who are anxious to get their hands on a voter list, and I can't provide one right now, but I will have them soon. So we use two lists to determine who's eligible to vote. We have the list that we received from Montgomery County that shows all residents registered to vote with the state of Maryland who live in the city of Takoma Park. We also keep a supplemental voter list of people who choose not to register with the state, people who are not eligible to register, such as non-citizen voters. And sometimes 16 and 17-year-olds register on that Takoma form and end up on the supplemental voter roll. As a reminder, though, 16 and 17-year-olds can register with the state. So they are welcome to go ahead and fill out the registration form, and we will get their name along with the list of registered voters. If people are not registered early, if they register less than 21 days before the election and they're voting in Takoma Park, I recommend you just submit your registration form to the city. Submit a Takoma Park voter registration form. That way we'll be sure to have you on the list of voters. You can, candidates can purchase a list from Montgomery County. All you can get though, it'll be the whole of Montgomery County, not just the city of Takoma Park. And you do pay for that. Traditionally, the county will provide me a list that I can give to candidates. So if you hold off a bit, I will have a list that you are just welcome to have a voter registration list. So, but it'll be a little while before I get that. But if you want the voter history, presidential and gubernatorial elections, you definitely likely need to get that from the county. Yeah, voter lists will include the name, address, and year of birth of the voter.
So just with respect to voter lists, I definitely would say if you do receive one from the city, you really got to be careful with that information. Please don't post it to a listserv. It does have people's names and addresses and years of birth. So
Yeah.
some people would consider that sensitive information. So
Yeah,
please keep
really
that.
good point. It is public information, but not that kind of public. I mean, it is not appropriate to post it publicly in the state of Maryland. It is not appropriate to do that.
I'll also say that just as having run campaigns in the past, that the voter list is your friend and you should really utilize it, especially when you're just tracking who you've talked to, whose doors you've knocked on. One thing that might really annoy a voter is if you meet them once and then meet them again the second time, thinking that this is the first time you met them. So the voter list is really a great resource, probably the most powerful resource available to candidates. Do we have any questions about the voter list? This one is yours, Jesse.
Oh, there we go. Sure. So the city manager, the current city manager, Rob DeSpirito, is willing to meet with people who are interested in running for office or who are candidates for office. He's willing to, by appointment, spend 30 to 45 minutes talking about the city and how it works, how the role of the city council and the role of the city manager and the city staff, and also respond to other questions as well. So that is an opportunity for now or later. So I want to make that available. We, as you all know, I hope, we are completely, all candidates are equal in our eyes. The city clerk, board of elections, city manager, senior city staff, we are not going to favor any candidate. And certainly the board of elections and I in particular consider that super important. You need to know that we are going to be fair and impartial in all our dealings with candidates. Ever since I've been with the city, Eric Bond, who used to be the editor of the Takoma Voice, has done candidate forums. Right now, he is the editor of the Takoma Park newsletter, but he will be conducting independent candidate forums to getting candidates together and posing questions that will be of interest probably to the voters. So that is not It's done independent of the city, and he will reach out to candidates after the nominating caucus to set up candidate forums. Also, it's likely that in various wards, there are often forums scheduled. Sometimes there could be a youth voter forum. There are opportunities to get candidates in front of the voters. So do take advantage of that if the opportunity comes up. I
Just
see raised hands.
letting folks know we have quite a bit of material left in about 30 minutes, but
Sorry about that.
we
I
can
talked
go
too
to.
long.
No, I wasn't trying to rush you, Jesse. You did not. Let's take these questions though, and then answer some questions in the chat. Randall?
Yeah, this is Randy from Ward 3. I just want to say that I'm also more than happy to talk with or correspond with anybody running. I'm not running in the next time around. I have one-term experience, and I'd be glad to share my experience with you. It's Randall G at tacomaparkmd.gov. Be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you for that.
By the same token, Peter Kovar, who did serve on the city council, is also willing to share his experiences with anyone who would like to speak with him, and I can share his contact information with you if anyone is interested in that.
Elizabeth, did you have a question?
Thank you. Yeah, in the last election, I requested to speak with the then city manager, and he did not meet with me, and I don't know if he met with other people. So would you be, maybe he didn't meet with anybody, but is it possible to make that transparent as to who is successful in getting requests and gets a meeting?
I am sorry, Elizabeth. You may recall that there was a bit of transition happening around the time of the election, but I'm sorry that happened to you. And I certainly, if anybody wants to have that meeting, I will do my best to make sure it happens.
So we have some questions here in the chat. Are voters reviewed against the tax rolls to discern if they actually live in the city limits? I don't think they are. I can't speak for the state of Maryland. I know that Board of Elections does not do that for Takoma Park. Is that right, Jesse?
That's right.
All right. We have another question. When will the city open to register new voters that are 16 years old and non-citizens? Jesse?
Always, all year round, anytime.
It looks like Paul has a question. Raise his hand.
Paul, I see your
You're unmuted. Go
chat.
ahead.
Hi, Jesse.
Hi, yeah, I see your chat. Yeah,
I don't want to be brusque or anything, but I mean, isn't the defining characteristic or one of the principal defining characteristics of living in Takoma Park paying the taxes?
Well, listen, I'm not going to get into that, but let me say this. If anyone identifies someone who is on the voter roll who doesn't live in the city, I'm happy to hear about that. So let me just leave it at that. If there's an issue, by all means, let me know.
Like I was saying before, if you have feedback for policy changes, we would love to hear it over email. But this webinar is really focused on helping candidates get ready for the upcoming election. So we still have quite a bit of material to get through. So please, by all means, email us, and we're happy to discuss some of your ideas. With that, we're getting into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty of it. We're going to talk about what are called attribution requirements, and we're going to talk about campaign finance reporting for the remainder of the webinar. I'm not going to read everything that are in these slides because I just don't think we have time for that. But these slides will be made available on the website, and I think the video will also be made available. The next 30 or 40 slides are really just so candidates and their treasurers and whoever they're working with on their elections and their campaigns can come back and look at them if they have questions. I try to be pretty in depth about how attribution and campaign finance works in Takoma Park. So just to begin, attribution is really, the idea behind attribution is that when you release campaign materials, like a flyer, for example, it needs to have what's called an authority line. That's also known as a disclaimer. And the purpose of that is to help the voter or the audience or the public know who the identity of the speaker is for that campaign material. Because obviously, I think it's obvious that we would have a problem if people were putting up flyers, for example, say attacking a candidate's record without knowing who is spending the money to do that. So all campaign materials are supposed to a viewer is supposed to know who is spending the money to post it, to who printed it, whose speech is that campaign material. Here's the definition of campaign materials. You can find it in the code. This is the text in the code, but you can click on that hyperlink there when this goes live on the city website if you want to read it yourself. It's pretty broad, as you can see. It pretty much captures all kinds of advertising, and here's a list of examples. And I'm sure people might have questions. I'm happy to answer some of these questions over email if you have very specific questions. But campaign materials is really meant to be broad. There are some things that you have exemptions for putting authority lines on, and that would be things that are just so small that it's not practicable to write authorized and paid for by candidate X. Here's more text from the Takoma Park Code. I recommend reading it, or at least reading it here later. I'm just going to keep going though. Authority lines, I'm sure everyone has seen them. Paid for and authorized by the committee to elect Roscoe the Rooster. They're usually in like a little box, often placed at the bottom of a campaign material or a communication. They should be clear and conspicuous. These are some guidelines just to help you figure out what would be appropriate. There's no hard and fast rule about what an authority line should be. It just needs to say who paid for it and who's authorizing it. That's also true for web communications as well. At the bottom of your website, you should be paid for and authorized by. So the attribution requirement for the authority lines also applies to campaign signs, and campaign signs are popular here in Takoma Park. So here are some rules about campaign signs. They're not allowed on city property. They're not allowed around city buildings, and they're not allowed in city parks. They are allowed on city rights of way. There's a maximum width and height of 26 inches. They must have the authority line, as I was saying. You have to put on the poster the date of the posting, and that's the date in which you put the sign up at that location. And Takoma Park City law says that sign can only be at that location for up to 14 days, after which it has to either be removed, moved, or redated. One quick and easy way to redate it is you get some stickers and you just put a sticker over the old date. It probably looks a little more professional than crossing it out and writing in a new date. I should also say, Cindy brought this up earlier. All of the attribution requirements, as well as the campaign finance requirements that we're going to talk about next, apply not just to candidates and their committees and their authorized agents, people who are working on their campaigns, but it also applies to what are called political committees. A political committee is a very broad term, but it's really any group of people or even one person who wants to spend money, or wants to raise money to try to, influence an election. They may advocate for the, voting for or the defeat of a candidate. Those organizations, just like those organizations on the federal level, need to register with Takoma Park. They need to file campaign finance reports. They need to follow all the attribution requirements. So one thing that might happen is that, sometimes a poster might be paid for by one person and authorized by another person. At that point, you can break up the paid for and authorized by. It could be paid for by, Matt, friends of Roscoe the Rooster, and authorized by Roscoe the Rooster's campaign. It's a little bit nitty gritty, and if and that really comes up, by all means, ask us and we can help you with that. Emmanuel asks in the chat, what's the enforcement mechanism for not following the 14-day rule to remove signs? I'm not actually sure what the penalty is. Jesse, are you there right now?
I am here. The sign can be removed if it's out of date. Now, I have to tell you, it's may not be removed, but it is not a violation to remove a sign that is no longer eligible to be in the right of way. Having said that, it's really much better to be polite about campaign signs. Just don't let your supporters remove campaign signs unless there is some real reason to do so, and let me know if there's any. Signs are always a problem, but let's all try to be really nice about each other's signs this time.
Yeah, as always, if there's questions, I think contact the city clerk, contact
Yeah.
questions, and ask questions before taking action.
I'm sorry, Elizabeth, I might have lowered your hand there. Did you have a comment?
Just a quick comment. I didn't know this before I printed my signs, but there are some residents of Takoma Park who feel very strongly that you have a union bug on your sign. Otherwise, your sign might end up in a trash can. So, and so you might want to explain what a union bug is. So.
That is certainly part of the ordinance.
Go ahead, Randy.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that many residents, while they don't own the right of way in front of their house, do feel a little bit of a responsibility and ownership over the signs that are posted there. So in my experience is to check with the homeowner in front of the right of way.
We have a question from the chat. Is the 14-day rule new or recent? I'm pretty sure we've had it for quite a while. Certainly the last 2 elections, right, Jesse?
Yeah, no, actually just for the last election, the sign, some of you may remember the sign rules were suspended during COVID. And then the sign ordinance was revised to allow signs in the right of way with this 14-day rule. It applies to all signs, not just campaign signs, all private signs.
All right, so does anyone have any other questions about authority lines? I know we went through it pretty quickly, or signs. Just remember that the whole idea of authority lines is letting voters know who paid for that campaign speech. Okay, looks like we don't have any questions. We're going to go on to campaign finance. I think this is probably the most complicated part of the code for the elections part of it. And I know we get lots of questions. For campaign finance, if you want to raise money or spend that money, you have to register with the city clerk. And as I said earlier, that also includes not just candidates, it includes political committees, which are groups of people or a person who are raising money and spending money for the purpose of influencing election. There are really 2 basic concepts in campaign finance. That's contributions and expenditures. Contributions are where did the money come from, and expenditures is where did the money go. There are different types of contributions. We're going to get to monetary, in-kind, and loans. And there are some exceptions to what are contributions. For example, volunteering, bank loans, and safe harbor events. So let's just keep going here. Of course, the purpose of campaign finance laws is to ensure transparency and accountability of money. This isn't just for voters to feel. One thing I like to explain to the candidates is that campaign finance is it helps. It's not just a burden to candidates. It helps candidates because it lets them reassure the people who are donating money to their campaign that money, that they're being stewards of that money and that they're taking care of spending it wisely and that they're tracking it correctly. It also shows that that you're taking serious, that responsibility. Catherine asked, what is a safe harbor event? We're going to get to that in a few slides. So I really encourage folks to think about this and work at it and try to learn about it. I think it's also important just for maintaining the integrity of our elections. And really at the end of the day, a lot of this just boils down to saving your receipts. And one big hint or big tip I suggest for folks is that when you go to the store to buy something, and let's say you're buying something for yourself for personal use and also stuff for the campaign, just do 2 separate transactions, one for the campaign stuff and then one for yourself. So you have 2 different receipts. So you can throw one away and then keep the other. But let's keep going. A contribution is a very broad thing. It's really any kind of thing of value. It could be services, it could be goods, loans, subscriptions, really anything that has monetary value. The 3 main categories are gifts of money. So it's in any form: cash, check, credit card, Venmo, PayPal, loans, and then in-kind contributions. We're going to get to what an in-kind contribution is, but it's basically a non-monetary contribution. So of course, there are limits to how much a person can contribute to a candidate. These limits are in the aggregate. So it's $1,000 per person per candidate for one election, and that's aggregate. So if you give 500 today, you can only give 500 more, and anything exceeding that will be in excess of the limit, and the candidate will have to refund it. We have a question here in the chat. Does offering your home as a venue for a meet and greet qualify as an in-kind contribution? That's a great question. That's what would be called a safe harbor event. We'll get to that. Basically, it will be an in-kind contribution if it exceeds certain thresholds. But really, your home as a venue, if that alone, then no, that wouldn't be an in-kind contribution. But we'll get to that. There's one exception to the contribution limit, and that's candidates can donate as much of their own personal funds or assets jointly owned with their spouse as much as they want. And listen, I don't love that, but we don't have a choice. That's just the way the law is. Not Takoma Park law, but U.S. constitutional law. Here are some examples that I don't think I have time to go over, but you can read them later. But basically, just describes what happens when you're an aggregate, when you how to count up loans, and you'll see it in the forms too. So this is a new aspect of campaign finance, loans. We just amended the code to regulate loans. Under the new law, candidates are allowed to receive loans, but they're not allowed to receive loans in excess of 5,000 in total, and they can't receive a loan of more than 1,000 from one person. That is not outstanding. That is cycle to date, meaning that if you received $1,000 of loans from your friend and then you pay back your friend, you cannot then receive another $1,000 of loans. That person will have maxed out their $1,000 loans, even though you paid them back. And that's true for the aggregate $5,000 amount as well. Again, there's an exception. Candidates are allowed to loan an unlimited amount of money of their own personal assets, the personal funds, to their campaign. Again, this is just constitutional law. You also are allowed to pay back, reimburse yourself from your campaign contributions, as long as all of this information is recorded correctly on your campaign finance reporting forms, which we will get to. But does anyone have any questions about loans so far? Here's Catherine asks, federal campaign limits are 3,300 for primary and 3,300 for general. So 1,000 is local or state law. That is Takoma Park law, the city law. These are a little more nuances about campaign loans that I don't think we need to get into, but I'm happy to talk about it a little bit more with any candidates if they have any questions. The one important thing to keep track is that a loan is still a contribution. So a loan will have a limit of the 5,000 and 1,000 for loans, but it will also count towards the contribution limit. So that's a little bit confusing. But loans are the outstanding balance of a loan is a contribution, with the exception of bank loans, because bank loans are made at an arm's length as an arm's length transaction in the ordinary course of business. They're not contributions, because a loan isn't giving you money to try to influence an election. They're giving you money because it's just what their business is. So long as that meets the market rates, that won't be considered a contribution. But you'll still have to report it, of course, as part of the loan form. So here are some examples. In the first example, the bank, it's a bank, made up bank. So long as the terms of the loans are standard market rates, that is not a contribution. In the second example, I showed that you can aggregate a contribution of $500 plus a $1,000 personal loan that's over the contribution limit, even though the personal loan is under the loan limit. Logan will still need to be refunded $500. I'm sorry, I'm going through this very quickly, but there's quite a bit of material. Well, that's it for loans. Does anyone have any questions for loans? I think. Okay. In-kind contributions are non-monetary contributions, so goods or services. So if you buy a bunch of pens and pencils and you bring them to your friend's campaign office, that would be an in-kind contribution. It's really anything. It's really anything that's non-monetary. So if your friend, so let's say your friend comes over and spends $500 on posters for you to post around town, that $500 spent would be written down as an in-kind contribution. And on the form, you would say, okay, from your friend, they gave you posters, so there'll be a column for you to write in the nature of the type of in-kind contribution, and then a monetary value. So you need to ask your friend, okay, how much did you spend on those posters? $500. Okay. And you need to, and that will count towards their aggregate limit of $1,000 contribution limit. This is getting to the weeds, but I think it's important. If you go tell your friend to go buy the $500 worth of posters for you, that would be considered a coordinated communication, and you would have to report that. So you can't get around it by telling your friend to go do it for me, even though you're not giving me the posters. You just do it for me. That would still be an in-kind contribution. So if there's any coordination between you and your friend or whoever you're asking this favor of, that would be an in-kind contribution. Jessica asks, how formal does the loan have to be? Can the candidate put $500 into the campaign initially and then reimburse himself when donations are made? Or must it be a formal loan with lots of paperwork? So if it's a personal loan, it doesn't need to be lots of paperwork. It will have to be reported on the loan form, which I'll show you. I mean, it's obviously a good idea to keep some record of this for your own purposes, but there will have to be some reporting on the loan form, which we can show you at the end.
Now, when you pay yourself back, those are considered expenditures and have to be reported as well, right? Or how are those?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the record, essentially.
Yep. I think we can skip this. I think folks can look into this if they're interested, but if your friend spends the $500 on posters without telling you, and you have no idea about it, and then puts those posters up around town that say, go vote for, Matt, those would not be reported as in-kind contributions, but your friend would still have to go register with the city clerk and then report those expenditures themselves. It's getting a little in the weeds. And as I said before, the aggregate limits apply to in-kind contributions. Here's just some ways to show you how to value what in-kind contribution is. Usually, if you just don't have the receipt and you don't know, you need to look at the market rate, you can find the price of it. So here are two exceptions to the in-kind contributions: volunteering and safe harbor events. Volunteering is providing personal services to a campaign, so long as you're not being compensated for that. That's not providing, so personal services as distinguished from goods. So for example, if you are a baker and you buy $500 worth of baking supplies and then maybe spend $1,000 of your own time baking things, and you bring those cookies and sell them as a fundraiser, the $1,000 worth of your time would be volunteering because of the personal services, but the $500 you spent on the cookies would not be volunteering. Those would be an in-kind contribution. So it gets a little tricky, but really the main point is you need to, volunteering is about the services. And so, for example, a lawyer could donate, volunteer their personal services, and that would not be counted as in-kind. That's also true for an accountant. An accountant could volunteer their personal services. You can receive discounts, and this doesn't get counted against you so long as they're in the ordinary course of business and not given to you because you're running for office. Here's some examples for volunteering. I think folks should just look at these later. So we had a couple questions about this in the chat earlier. Safe harbor events. That's basically if you're volunteering your home up or some other communal space, say for a party or a fundraiser or anything like that, you don't have to, make up a rent number for your house to call that an in-kind. No, that's covered under the safe harbor, so you would not have to report that. You do have to report the event itself, but you don't have to report that you made an in-kind contribution of some amount of money. And that also is true for up to $200 of money spent on, things for that party, like invitations, foods, beverages. You do need to report it, but it's not counted as an in-kind contribution. So I highly recommend you read these parts of the code. This is found in the definitions. You can see it in the slide here. And I'm happy to answer any questions, or the board can answer any questions if folks have any questions about this later. There is a limit here. So if you hold a really glitzy party, if you spend $500 on beer, then you would have to probably report at least $300 of that as an in-kind contribution. And this is just more discussion of safe harbor events. I recommend folks read this later.
And Matt, maybe it's worth mentioning, just going back to the loan thing a little bit, it's generally a good idea to open a campaign bank account, right? Which you can request from the city clerk a letter if necessary to do that. And if you have a separate campaign bank account, you can more easily track perhaps loans to yourself and payments back as well. Just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, that's definitely true. It's a lot easier to track transactions if you just have one bank statement that are exclusively related to campaigns. Yeah, but you're not required to, though. So
yeah,
and some campaigns don't raise that much money either, and so you might just not feel like you need to do that because you might spend most of your time knocking on doors.
If I can, I'll add one more thing about bank accounts. Some banks are very unfriendly to opening this kind of campaign bank account, so you may run into problems, and we just can't do anything about that. So I will write a letter that will try to allow you to open that account, but I can't guarantee that any bank will accept it.
Randy, do you have a comment?
I just want to say that my experience, I opened up an account with Capital One in Silver Spring. You have to maintain a balance, and there are, but they did it. So one of the positive things is they keep records of expenditures and investments or whatever, revenue, and so that's a good way of making it easier for your treasurer to know how to fill in the campaign expenditure reports.
Yeah, it certainly becomes a lot more challenging when transactions get commingled with your personal expenses, which is, if you don't get a bank account, it's I highly recommend either keeping a spreadsheet going, keeping all your receipts, trying to update it either as frequently as you can as transactions come in and go out. Okay, now we're going to look at campaign finance, who can and can't contribute. I think folks should become familiar with from whom they're allowed to receive campaign contributions. If you do receive a contribution that you're not allowed to, from someone from whom you're not allowed to receive those contributions, you just need to refund it. You know, you need to report it and then refund it. And if you can't refund it, for example, if it's an anonymous contributor, you need to contribute. You need to donate to the city fund at a certain time point, which we'll get to. So anonymous contributions are not allowed in Takoma Park. If you do receive one, you should try to identify the source of it, where it came from. If you are able to identify the contributor, you just need to speak with them and ask them, listen, because they might have wanted their contribution to be anonymous because they might know that they don't want their name to be published on a campaign finance report, on the Takoma Park website. In which case, they just need to have their money refunded to them, or that money just needs to be reported as an anonymous contribution and contributed to the general fund. You're just not allowed to receive campaign anonymous contributions. So Cindy asked, how is foreign national defined? I assume it does not include city residents. That's right here. We'll look at it right here. A foreign national, which includes, so someone outside of the United States and who's not a citizen, and an individual within the United States who is not a citizen of the United States and who is not lawfully admitted for permanent residence. So under this definition, a foreign national does not include someone with a valid green card, for example. And of course, those folks are, registered through the Takoma Park City, through Jesse's office, that are also allowed to vote.
Sure, and let me add here, it's a little difficult, that contribution law. It's actually federal law that applies to us, which is a little bit shocking, but we just want to make people aware that it does exist, and we don't want anyone to get any resident who is not a US citizen, who maybe is not a permanent resident. We don't want anyone to get into any kind of trouble if their name appears on the website as being a contributor to a campaign. So we just want to make people aware of that, but we are not, that is not our enforcement. So the Board of Elections and the city that's not our enforcement problem. That's a federal problem, federal enforcement, but we just want people to be aware of it.
So this is just a bit more nuance about contributions, but it's pretty, I think, self-evident. Or if you can tell your treasurer to receive contributions on your behalf. If your treasurer goes and collects contributions from their neighbors and then gives them to you, the contribution is not from the treasurer. It's obviously from the neighbors. But just to be clear, it's not the candidate who has to physically be receiving every single check. Other people can be authorized to receive checks on their behalf.
Yes, Jeff and Matt, I saw there was one comment around PACs not being allowed in municipal elections. So if you're a political action committee, you make an expenditure not as a candidate in the election, you do have to register as a political committee in the city, but you cannot donate directly to a campaign as a political committee.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah.
And we haven't had political committees register in the past, but I would hope that if folks are forming these committees, that they will register, and we'll certainly be on the lookout for that. So we talked a bit about the first part of campaign finance, which is contributions. We're just going to go over expenditures now. Again, that's money going out. That's how you spend the contributions that came in. So expenditures really include everything that a campaign might spend money on. The few things that it doesn't include is kind of like earned media. So if your interview with Eric Bond, even though Eric is using his own equipment and all of that stuff to run a radio show with you on it, that's not an expenditure. It's not an in-kind, it's not expenditure at all. Same with like if a reporter writes a story about you, that's not an expenditure. If you do go pay a newspaper to run an advertisement, that would be an expenditure. So of course you can use contributions to pay for expenditures, and here's a big list that's non-inclusive, that doesn't cover everything, but is a lot of things that are common expenditures for campaigns. One thing I'll note that often comes up is that the service fees for PayPal, those are considered expenditures. So if you use PayPal to receive campaign contributions, then PayPal takes a 3.5% cut or whatever. That 3.5% cut from that contribution will be reported in your campaign finance as an expenditure because you're using the PayPal service. So we have a question from Catherine. Is a group of people who collect positions or make recommendations considered a political committee? No, a political committee under the code only covers groups of people who are raising money and then spending money. If people just, post their thoughts on the internet, that's just standard, traditional, classic First Amendment political speech. That doesn't involve campaign finance. If they are spending their own money taking out Facebook ads, that would be covered by campaign finance law. And they would have to register as a political committee and report those expenditures. But people just getting together, even if it's a group of people and they're just sharing their thoughts, that's not, they wouldn't have to register in that case. So candidates can also use contributions for the ordinary and necessary expenses incurred in connection with duties of the individual as a holder of city office. And they can also donate those to certain designated nonprofit organizations. And they may also transfer those funds to a political committee whose purpose is to elect that same person. So you can't transfer your money to a different political committee for a different candidate or for a political party. You can only do it if you want to go run for Montgomery County or mayor or whatever else. You can transfer your contributions, your funds from your Takoma Park City campaign fund to that other committee. What are the things that campaigns not allowed to spend money on, campaign contributions on? So like I said, you can't transfer it to the account of another candidate or political party. And you can't, obviously use it for personal use. So what is personal use? That's basically if you were going to incur an expense, if you were not running for office in the circumstance where you were not running, that would be a personal use expense. So let me skip forward and I can show you some examples here. So you could spend campaign funds to pay for fundraising events, like catered event, but you can't use that money to take your family out for dinner because you would be taking your family out for dinner anyways, but regardless of whether you were running for office. Same with buying food to eat while you're at home. You obviously can't use that you can't use campaign money to just feed your family at home because you would have to incur that anyways. You could, if you were going to have a fundraiser, pay for food using campaign funds. I think this is pretty intuitive. Sometimes there are tough questions. In those tough questions, I highly recommend reaching out and talking with us. Obviously, you can come up with any number of hypotheticals for this. And just more examples for folks to read. Here are some examples of expenditures. And here's when that comes up. If you spend $200 of your own money to make a website, you need to report that $200 as a contribution from yourself to the campaign. And then you must need to report a $200 expenditure on that website. And you'd list the website company. the point of this obviously is if a website is up on the internet, people are going to want to know who paid for that website. So you have to report all that information. Even if it's just you paying for your own thing, you still need to report it. Looking at the second example, this is an example of a coordinated communication. If they ask their friend Frankie, candidate Roscoe asked their friend Frankie to print up and distribute flyers, Frankie spends $200 doing it and distribute those flyers around. Even though Frankie didn't give $200 to Roscoe, he didn't give the flyers to Roscoe. That's still an in-kind contribution from from Frankie. Then candidate Roscoe has to report that as an in-kind contribution, and then has to report the expenditure of spending of those printed materials. And they have to follow all of the authority lines. That's all there is about expenditures and contributions. I know it's a lot. I highly recommend folks read all of these slides. Does anyone have any questions about that before we just look at the campaign finance really quickly? This should just take a few more minutes. So no questions on expenditures or contributions. Okay. So yeah, as we heard earlier, there are 4 reports that have to be filed, the post-nomination. Oh, Jessica, go ahead.
The example that you just gave where somebody else prints the flyers and distributes them, is that one of the situations where those receipts are needed, or are those receipts needed for the expenditures directly by the campaign?
So to clarify, receipts are never needed by law or anything. When you say receipts, like the physical receipt recording the purchase, you don't, the city clerk doesn't collect the receipts when your campaign finance reports are filed. That said, you should always try to have them, because if any issue comes up, it's just a lot easier to say, hey, look, I spent $200 on flyers. So in this case, if you don't have the $200 receipt, I mean, that's fine, but you still need to report it. In an ideal world, you have receipts for everything.
Okay, thank you.
But I just know that when you're running a campaign, it gets kind of hectic and crazy, and it's just hard to do that. So long as you're just like recording the actual transactions in your campaign finance reports, that's the most important thing. Okay, so folks understand for the campaign finance reports, those are public. Those will be, as soon as we're able, posted to the city website. I think the city clerk will review them very quickly, but the city clerk's not going to review them for mistakes. The city clerk will post the campaign finance reports even if they have mistakes. So candidates and treasurers should be very careful about making sure they get everything right and everything zeroes out so that it nets out correctly. Like I said, we will look over those ourselves and we will get in touch with you if you find mistakes, but the mistaken campaign finance report will be posted to the city website.
If there is an error on a report, you can submit an amended report afterwards.
Yeah, you can submit multiple amended reports as well. Yeah.
Jessica, is your hand still up?
I don't think so.
Okay.
And the reason why we post them as quickly as possible is because we just want to get that information to voters as quickly as possible so they can see how campaigns are spending their money and raising their money. There's not a ton of information you need to keep for contributions. Just the date of receipt of the contribution, the full name of the contributor, whether the contribution was monetary or in kind, the amount, and then the aggregate amount. And it'll be very evident when looking at the forms, the information that you need to post. And we'll have those forms up very soon. And that's true for expenditures as well. We just need the date. It's not a ton of information. We need the date of the expenditure, the name of the person or the entity, the company that is receiving payment for the expenditure, the address of that business or person, the description of what that expenditure is. So it could just say office supplies. It could say transportation. It could say, it doesn't have to be that specific. You only have like one cell block on a spreadsheet to fill in that that description. And then of course the amount of the expenditure. Under Takoma Park law, you don't have to itemize expenditures that are under $50. Instead, you would just list them as an unitemized lump sum expenditures. I kind of recommend you just itemize everything. It just, I think, makes life easier for you, and it's just more transparency from you to your voter, your donors. People like to see how their money's being spent, frankly. And for whatever it's worth, your opponents will also have access to these campaign finance reports. And so they might comment on, on them. And like I said earlier, just do your best to keep records or receipts of these transactions. Stick them in an envelope, just hold on to them. You don't have to, just putting them in an envelope at the end of the day, and then just making sure that the amount of receipts in the envelope sums up to what you have in your spreadsheets is, I think, a bare minimum. It's not too hard to do. The last thing, we don't need to get too much into this, but when the campaigns are over, you have to dispense of your surplus campaign funds. If you hadn't spent all of that money, there are rules to do that. This is so far down the line, so I just recommend reading this later. But basically, you can refund them. You can donate them to the general fund, or you can donate them to a nonprofit. And there, of course, there are rules against using surplus campaign funds for personal use. That's it. I know that was a lot. But, like I said earlier, we are eager to hear feedback from folks. I know folks had a lot of thoughts and opinions about policy, and we're happy to hear that. Please email us. Also, importantly, let us know how we can make this process easier for you as a candidate. We want people to run for office here in Takoma Park. And so we are very eager to hear ideas about how to make it easier for you to do that. Does anyone have any questions? I know we went about 15 minutes over. I think I bored everyone to death, so that's good. Randy?
I just want to say thank you. You guys are great. And anybody working with the city clerk's office, they are the best. They understand real people.
Thanks, Randy.
We try. Yeah. So this is, thank you everybody who hung in here. And I know a lot of people had to drop off, but this is our second effort to have a pre-election session for candidates. We will probably do a second session after the nominating caucus, but in the meantime, questions are most welcome. We have the Board of Elections email. You can email me as well. We'll interchange information. So wherever you send your question, we'll all know about it. And really, we're here to help you be successful. And I think with that, unless anybody has anything else to add, I'm going to end this session. So we'll post the recording and the chat and the slides.
Thanks everyone for coming. Thank you, Jesse.
Yeah. Okay, I
Thank
just want to
you
make
very
sure.
much.
Yeah, thanks all. Good night.